I still remember the first time Vincent told me something was off. He's 72 now, a quiet man with a soft smile, the kind of neighbor who waves from the porch even if you barely know him. Vincent was the type who always had a slice of avocado toast in the morning, swearing it was his secret to feeling young. But one autumn afternoon, he sat across from me at the small cafe by the corner of Maple Street, his hand shaking ever so slightly as he tried to lift his coffee cup. That wasn't like him. Vincent was steady, strong, the sort who never let his age show too much. That day, however, he looked pale, unsettled, as if something inside him had shifted. He leaned in and whispered, "I think the avocado's been making me sick." I almost laughed at first, because who would suspect a fruit so many call a superfood? But then I caught the look in his eyes, fear mixed with confusion. Vincent had always trusted food more than pills, always believed that nature carried its own medicine. Yet here he was, doubting the very thing he thought was saving him. He described how, after his usual breakfast, his chest had tightened, his heartbeat felt out of rhythm, and he was short of breath. At first he thought it was stress, or maybe the weather, but the episodes repeated, and deep down he knew something was wrong. The turning point came when he woke up one morning with his pillow damp from sweat and a dull ache running down his left arm. He told me he sat at the edge of his bed, frozen, wondering if this was the beginning of a heart attack. His wife, Claire, urged him to see a doctor, but Vincent brushed it off. Like many men his age, he didn't want to burden anyone. Yet the fear lingered, and every time he reached for an avocado, he wondered if it was a friend or a hidden enemy. As I listened, I realized Vincent wasn't just fighting discomfort. He was wrestling with betrayal. All his life, he had been careful. He had given up smoking in his 40s, started walking in the mornings, even cut back on sugar when his cholesterol crept up. And yet, here was this fruit, praised by doctors, celebrated in glossy magazines, that left him feeling more fragile than before. He couldn't make sense of it, and that confusion weighed on him more heavily than the symptoms themselves. That afternoon at the cafe, his voice cracked when he said, "They tell us avocados are healthy, but no one tells us how dangerous they can be if you eat them the wrong way." He wasn't angry, he was bewildered, maybe even betrayed. And I could see how the doubt had settled into him, making him second-guess what was once routine. His plate of avocado toast had turned into a question mark staring back at him every morning. The truth is, Vincent's story isn't rare. He's one of many seniors who discover, often too late, that the foods we praise can carry hidden risks. The avocado had always been his ally, creamy, satisfying, filled with the promise of health. But the mistakes he didn't even know he was making had slowly begun to show their teeth. His doctor later explained that certain combinations, certain ways of storing and cooking could trigger the very problems Vincent feared most: heart strain, liver stress, even reactions that left him weak and dizzy. That knowledge shook him. He sat in the sterile light of the clinic, listening to medical terms spill out like a foreign language, while all he could think of was the half avocado sitting on his kitchen counter back home. He told me later that it felt almost absurd, like discovering your lifelong friend had been quietly poisoning you. And yet, that absurdity gave way to a sobering reality. Food is powerful, but it can harm as much as it heals if we don't understand it. I could see the shift in him over the following weeks. Vincent stopped approaching his meals with blind faith. Instead, he began to pay attention, to ask questions, to notice the details he once ignored. He learned how the simplest habits, a leftover half left in the fridge too long, an unripe fruit tossed into the blender, a seed ground down because someone on the internet claimed it was healthy, could all backfire in ways he never imagined. Each realization felt like lifting a veil, and yet, rather than growing bitter, Vincent grew curious. He told me he wanted to understand, not to fear. "If I'm going to eat this thing," he said one evening as we walked down the block, "I want to know how to do it right. I don't want to throw away something good. I just don't want to be careless anymore." That was the beginning of his transformation, not in the food itself, but in the awareness that surrounded it. It wasn't just about avocados, it was about trust, about learning that even the foods we believe are safest can turn on us if we don't treat them with respect. And that's what I want to share with you. Because Vincent's story is not just his. It belongs to anyone who has ever believed they were doing the right thing, only to discover a hidden risk waiting quietly beneath the surface. Vincent's journey is one of awakening, and as I tell you the mistakes he made, I want you to hear them not as rules from a textbook, but as lessons written in his own life. They carry the weight of his fear, his questions, and ultimately his relief when he found safer ways forward. Every senior deserves that clarity. Every loved one deserves to know the hidden truths before it's too late. When I think of Vincent now, I don't see the man who sat trembling over a coffee cup, afraid his heart was failing him. I see a man who chose to face uncertainty with courage, who transformed doubt into knowledge, and who now eats his avocado with care instead of fear. His story is a reminder. Health is not only about what we eat, but how we choose to meet the truths hidden inside what we eat. And so, if you've ever reached for that green fruit thinking it was nothing but good, I want you to pause for a moment. Walk with me through Vincent's story. You might see yourself in him. You might recognize his mistakes in your own kitchen. But more importantly, you'll discover, as he did, that knowledge turns fear into strength. And that strength could very well be the difference between harm and healing. Vincent never thought twice about the half avocado that had become his daily ritual. For years, he would slice it open, sprinkle a bit of salt, and mash it onto his morning toast. The creamy green spread gave him a sense of control, a sense that he was doing something good for his body as the years piled on. Doctors on television swore by avocados, nutritionists praised them, and even his grandchildren would roll their eyes and say, "Grandpa and his superfood again." It was a part of his identity. Vincent, the man who stayed young by eating healthy. But life has a way of shaking even the strongest beliefs when you least expect it. The first hint that something wasn't quite right came quietly, almost like a whisper his body was trying to send. Vincent noticed his chest fluttering some mornings after breakfast. It wasn't pain exactly, more like a bird trapped inside, beating against his ribcage. He brushed it off as nerves or perhaps the weather, the kind of things men his age often ignore. But then the flutter turned into tightness, and one morning his hand trembled so much he could hardly lift his coffee cup. That was the moment he knew something was shifting inside him, something he could no longer dismiss. He told me about it one afternoon at the cafe where we often met. Vincent leaned across the table, his eyes unsettled, and whispered, "I think it's the avocado." At first I thought he was joking, but the way his hand shook as he gripped his cup told me he was serious. He had trusted this fruit, had believed it was his shield against the ailments that claimed so many men his age. Yet now suspicion had crept in like an uninvited guest. "They all tell us it's healthy," he said, voice low, "but I feel worse. I feel tricked." There was pain in his tone, the kind that comes when faith collides with doubt. That week, Vincent began writing things down. He kept a little notebook by his chair, the kind with a cracked leather cover that had seen better days. Every time he ate avocado, he marked it. Every time he felt the tightness in his chest or the dizziness in his head, he drew a small X. Within days, patterns emerged, and the realization unsettled him even more. What he thought was a healing habit seemed to be hurting him. He confessed to Claire, his wife, who looked at him with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "But Vincent," she said softly, "you've been eating them for years." He nodded, the words heavy on his tongue. "And maybe I've been making mistakes for just as long." One morning, after another restless night, Vincent sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the pale light filtering through the curtains. His heart thudded unevenly, his arm tingled, and sweat dampened his pillow. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was how it ended. He thought of Claire still sleeping beside him, of his grandchildren who adored his silly stories, of the garden he had promised to tend when spring came again. Fear gripped him, but so did determination. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The avocado, his symbol of health, was demanding answers. The doctor's visit was sobering. Sitting in that sterile room, Vincent felt small, like a schoolboy waiting for reprimand. The doctor spoke of interactions, of the ways certain foods could stir trouble when combined with age, with medications, with fragile organs. Vincent barely heard the medical terms. What stayed with him was the doctor's gentle warning. Sometimes the very thing we think is saving us can quietly work against us. It wasn't the fruit itself that was evil, but the way it was eaten, the habits surrounding it, the blind trust that left no room for caution. Vincent left the clinic with a new lens through which to see his morning ritual. In the days that followed, his kitchen became both battlefield and classroom. He stood over his cutting board with wary eyes, no longer slicing carelessly, but pausing, thinking, questioning. He remembered the pit he often left in the leftover half, believing it would keep it fresh. He recalled the time he ground the seed into a smoothie after seeing it online. He thought of the rock-hard avocados he'd tossed into the blender, proud of not wasting food. Each memory was a revelation, each habit a mistake unmasked, and with each revelation came a mix of regret and relief. Regret that he hadn't known sooner, relief that he could now begin again, differently. Claire watched him with quiet patience. She saw the furrow in his brow, the way his hands lingered over the fruit as if waiting for it to confess its secrets. One evening, she reached for his hand and said, "It's not betrayal, Vincent. It's a lesson. Maybe the fruit isn't to blame. Maybe it's here to remind us we must keep learning even now." He looked at her, eyes tired but softening, and realized she was right. His story with avocados wasn't over. It was only changing chapters. What once was blind trust would now be mindful care. Vincent's grandchildren, curious as ever, noticed his hesitation at family brunch. "Grandpa, no avocado today?" one of them teased, pointing at the empty spot on his plate. Vincent smiled faintly and replied, "Not yet. First, I've got to learn its secrets." They laughed, but there was wisdom hidden in his words. He was no longer the man who ate because everyone said it was good. He was becoming the man who ate because he understood why and how it mattered. That shift, though subtle, was profound. The shocking truth about healthy avocados was not that they were poison, nor that they were miracles. It was that they were powerful, powerful enough to heal, but also powerful enough to harm if handled without respect. Vincent had lived long enough to know that life rarely fit into neat boxes of good and bad. Food was no different. What mattered was awareness, intention, the courage to question even the habits we hold closest. And for Vincent, that courage was awakening in him day by day. As he sat one evening, notebook open before him, Vincent scribbled a final thought in shaky but determined handwriting. It's not about giving up avocados. It's about giving up the mistakes. He closed the notebook with a firm hand, feeling the weight of the truth settle into his chest, not as fear, but as resolve. Tomorrow he would try again, this time with eyes wide open. Vincent didn't want to go back to the doctor's office, but the memory of that morning, the sweat on his pillow, the uneven thud of his heart was still too fresh. Claire had insisted, her voice firm but tender. "You can't keep brushing this off, Vincent. Please, for me." He finally agreed, though he walked into the clinic with the same reluctance of a man stepping into a storm he could not predict. The waiting room was filled with people his age, each wearing that look of quiet resignation, the look of those who know time has started to weigh heavier on their shoulders. Vincent shifted in his seat, clutching his hat, wondering if they too had once believed that eating right would keep them safe. He wasn't sick in the way they look sick, but he knew something was brewing inside him, something he couldn't name, and that frightened him most of all. When his name was called, Vincent shuffled in, his chest tight, not from illness this time, but from anticipation. The doctor, a silver-haired man in his 60s, greeted him kindly. He had the calm presence of someone who had seen thousands of cases, yet never forgot that each one carried a human story. Vincent explained his symptoms, hesitantly at first, then with growing urgency, the fluttering chest, the dizziness, the way it seemed to follow his avocado breakfasts. He half expected the doctor to laugh, to dismiss it as coincidence. But the doctor didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Vincent," he said, "food can be medicine, but it can also be dangerous if we're not careful. Even one bite under the wrong circumstances can backfire." The words landed heavily. Vincent's chest tightened again, but this time from fear. He had always thought harm came from excess. Too much sugar, too much salt, too much fat. But now the doctor was saying that sometimes the risk came not from indulgence, but from a single, innocent choice. The doctor explained gently that certain foods, like avocado, could interfere with medications or put unexpected strain on older bodies. Vincent heard the words blood thinning, liver enzymes, allergies, but what stayed with him was the tone, the steady, fatherly way the doctor spoke, as if guiding him toward a truth Vincent wasn't ready to face alone. "It's not about giving up what you love," the doctor continued. "It's about learning how to approach it wisely. That's what keeps you safe." As he listened, Vincent's mind wandered to the years he had spent trusting without question. He remembered seeing glossy magazine covers calling avocado a superfood. He remembered influencers on television stirring it into smoothies, chefs grilling it like a delicacy. Never once did he stop to ask if there was a catch. He had taken it all at face value, believing that if everyone praised it, it must be harmless. Now, in that small white room, with the doctor's words ringing in his ears, he felt both betrayed and enlightened. On the drive home, Claire kept glancing at him, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he sighed and said, "The doctor thinks even one bite can hurt if it's the wrong bite." Claire reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then we'll just make sure it's the right bite," she replied softly. Her optimism steadied him, but the weight of responsibility pressed harder now. He couldn't simply rely on routine. Every meal felt like a decision that carried consequence. That evening, Vincent stood in front of his kitchen counter staring at a ripe avocado. He touched the skin, firm yet yielding, and wondered how something so ordinary could hold such power. He thought of the doctor's warning: one bite could backfire, and it sent a shiver down his spine. He had always eaten with confidence, but now he felt like a man defusing a bomb, cautious, deliberate, second-guessing every move. He sliced it open slowly, the knife gliding through the green flesh. The pit revealed itself like an eye staring back at him, and for a moment, Vincent imagined it mocking him for his ignorance. He set half aside and took a small taste, more mindful than he had ever been before. It was the same fruit he had eaten for decades, yet it felt different, like a secret he was only just beginning to uncover. Over the next week, Vincent kept to small portions. He listened to his body carefully, as if it were an old friend trying to speak in whispers. He noticed when his heart felt calmer, when the dizziness didn't follow. He noticed too when his stomach cramped if the fruit was too firm, or when fatigue set in if he ate too much at once. For the first time in years, he realized he was paying attention not just to the taste of his food, but to the story it told after the meal ended. Claire saw the change in him. She noticed how he paused before eating, how he wrote notes in his worn little book, how he no longer scooped avocado onto toast with abandon, but placed it gently, thoughtfully. She told him, "You're not just eating, Vincent, you're listening." And he realized she was right. The doctor's warning had unsettled him, but it had also awakened something, an awareness he had long ignored in the comfort of routine. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted their kitchen in gold, Vincent closed his notebook and smiled faintly. "It's not about fear," he said aloud, more to himself than to Claire. "It's about respect, respect for what food can do." And in that moment, he felt the fear loosen its grip. He understood that the doctor hadn't meant to frighten him, but to give him a gift, the gift of awareness, the chance to choose wisely before it was too late. The truth was clear now: even something as beloved as avocado carried risks when mishandled. But Vincent also knew that with care, with consistency, and with attention, it could still be the ally he had always believed it to be. What mattered was the choice he made with every bite. And as he folded his hands and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks before dinner, he knew that the journey he had begun was not about losing trust in food, but about rebuilding it on firmer, wiser ground. Vincent had always trusted the little kitchen tricks passed down through family. His grandmother used to tell him, "Leave the pit in and the avocado will stay fresh." He remembered her voice as clearly as if she were standing beside him, slicing fruit with weathered hands. For decades, he followed that advice without question. Whenever he saved half an avocado, he dutifully left the pit in, thinking it was his shield against browning, against waste. It was simple, convenient, and it gave him the comforting sense that he was doing it right. But one afternoon, after his doctor's warning, Vincent sat in his kitchen, staring at the browned half he had left overnight. The surface looked mottled and uninviting, and a faint, sour smell rose as he leaned closer. Something about it unsettled him. For the first time in his life, he asked himself, "Is this safe? Or have I been fooling myself all these years?" The doubt gnawed at him, and he decided to dig deeper. Claire watched from across the room as he pulled his notebook closer. "You're not writing again, are you?" she asked with a half smile. Vincent chuckled softly. "Maybe I'm becoming a detective," he said. But in truth, it wasn't a joke. He was determined to uncover what was hidden beneath his habits. That night, he looked up studies, reading slowly, carefully, with his glasses slipping down his nose. And what he found shook him. He discovered that leaving the pit in hardly slowed browning at all. Scientists had tested it, measured it, proven that it only protected the tiny area it touched, while the rest of the fruit was just as vulnerable to oxygen. The myth had survived not because it worked, but because it sounded simple and reassuring. Vincent felt betrayed by tradition, by convenience, even by his own trust. He thought of all the times he had eaten those brown speckled leftovers, believing they were harmless. Now he wondered how much risk he had unknowingly carried into his body. The following morning, Vincent stood in front of the refrigerator holding half an avocado he had left overnight. The pit sat there proudly, like a soldier guarding its post, but the flesh around it told another story. It was soft, browned, and unappealing. He brought it to the trash, his chest heavy with realization. Claire, sensing his frustration, placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault," she said gently. "You trusted what you knew." Vincent nodded, but the words stung. It wasn't just about food, it was about realizing how easily we accept what's handed to us, never questioning, never checking. Determined to try differently, Vincent cut a new avocado that afternoon. Instead of leaving the pit in, he brushed the flesh with lemon juice, something he had never bothered with before. The tart scent filled the kitchen, and he felt a strange kind of pride in this small act. He wrapped it tightly in plastic and slid it into the fridge. When he unwrapped it the next day, his eyes widened. The green was still vibrant, the texture still creamy. It was as if the fruit itself was thanking him for the extra care. Claire joined him at the table, tasting the preserved half with a slice of bread. "Better, isn't it?" she said, smiling. Vincent nodded, a quiet relief flooding through him. It wasn't just about avoiding browning, it was about knowing that his food was safer, fresher, less likely to harbor the unseen bacteria he had read about in the studies. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of confidence returning. Later that week, Vincent shared his discovery with his daughter, who stopped by with her kids. She laughed when he explained how the pit myth had fooled him. "Dad, you sound like a YouTube health expert," she teased. But when he showed her the side-by-side difference, the brown, mushy half compared to the bright one preserved with lemon, her laughter softened into respect. "Maybe you're teaching me something this time," she admitted. Vincent smiled, realizing that even in his 70s he could still learn, still change, still guide. But the deeper truth weighed on him too. It wasn't only about avocados, it was about habits. How many other things had he accepted without question? How many other small shortcuts could be quietly undermining his health? The pit in the avocado became a symbol for him, a symbol of the easy myths we cling to because they're comfortable. And as he sat on the porch that evening, watching the sky fade into dusk, he promised himself he would no longer be careless with what he put into his body. That night, Vincent dreamed of his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the sound of her voice. But instead of blindly following her advice, he imagined telling her what he had learned, that sometimes love and tradition are not enough to keep us safe. He woke with a bittersweet feeling, torn between nostalgia and wisdom. Change was never easy, especially when it meant questioning the voices of those who came before. But Vincent knew it was necessary. The next morning, he prepared breakfast with newfound purpose. He sliced his avocado, brushed it gently with lemon, and wrapped it with care. He smiled at the thought that this simple act, so small and ordinary, might be what kept him safe. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel fear when he lifted his fork. He felt gratitude for knowledge, for the chance to correct his course, for the gift of another day to learn. In the end, Vincent realized the pit myth wasn't just about avocados. It was a lesson in paying attention, in questioning old habits, and daring to believe that we can always learn something new, no matter our age. And as he bit into the fresh, vibrant fruit, he knew this was not just food on his plate. It was hope, quietly reborn in every careful choice he made. Vincent had always trusted the refrigerator. To him, it was the safe place, the guardian that kept yesterday's meals waiting for tomorrow. Growing up, his mother would save leftovers without a second thought, and he had carried that same trust into his own life. If something looked fine, smelled fine, he believed it was fine. But after his discovery about the avocado pit myth, doubt began to creep in. He started wondering if fresh was as safe as he'd always believed. One morning, Vincent opened the refrigerator to find a half avocado he had saved 2 nights earlier. It sat in a small glass dish, the flesh darkened, the edges soft. He almost threw it away, but then habit tugged at him. "It's only a couple of days," he muttered to himself. For decades, he would have eaten it without hesitation. But this time he paused. Something in the smell, subtle but off, made him uneasy. He remembered the words he had read about bacteria creeping in when food was left too long. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Claire noticed his hesitation. "What's wrong, Vincent?" she asked gently, stepping beside him. He lifted the dish toward her. "This doesn't feel right anymore. I've been keeping them longer than I should." She looked at him with concern. "Then don't eat it. It's not worth the risk." But Vincent hated waste. Throwing food away felt wrong, especially when it looked almost fine. Yet, for the first time, he saw the fruit not as nourishment, but as a gamble. The simple act of saving half an avocado had turned into a question of safety. Later that week, Vincent met his old friend Harold for coffee. They had known each other since their working days, back when Vincent was a foreman and Harold managed the accounts. Over steaming mugs, Vincent confessed his growing unease about food storage. Harold laughed at first, saying, "You're overthinking it, Vince. We've been eating leftovers all our lives." But when Vincent described the studies he had read, the dangers of bacteria like listeria that could grow even in the cold, Harold's smile faded. "I lost a cousin to food poisoning," he admitted quietly. "Never thought twice about where it started. Maybe you're onto something." That conversation stayed with Vincent. It wasn't just about avocados anymore. It was about all the times he had trusted his fridge without question. He remembered a summer years ago when Claire had fallen ill after eating leftover potato salad. They had chalked it up to a stomach bug, but now he wondered if it had been something more. The realization unsettled him deeply. What else had they been overlooking? How many close calls had there been? Determined not to repeat old mistakes, Vincent began changing small habits. He started labeling containers with dates, something Claire teased him about at first. "You're running a restaurant now?" she laughed, but when she saw how seriously he took it, she softened. Together, they agreed to keep certain foods for no more than 2 days, even if it meant tossing them out. Vincent's old aversion to waste battled with his new understanding of risk, but gradually, the fear of illness outweighed the guilt of discarding. One evening, their daughter came by with the grandchildren. She noticed the neatly labeled containers in the fridge and chuckled, "Dad's gone professional." Vincent smiled, but there was pride in his eyes. He explained to her that freshness wasn't just about appearance, that food could turn dangerous quietly, invisibly, even overnight. His daughter nodded, perhaps realizing for the first time how much thought her father was putting into something so ordinary. The grandchildren, of course, didn't care about the science. They only cared that Grandpa was safe to play with another day. That night, Vincent sat on the porch as the crickets sang in the distance. He thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly something fresh could become a threat. He realized that aging wasn't just about slower steps or weaker muscles, it was about facing truths you once ignored. The refrigerator, once his symbol of security, had become a reminder that nothing lasts forever, not even food. And perhaps, he thought, that was the lesson life was teaching him, to appreciate what is fresh today, because tomorrow it might not be. Claire joined him with a cup of tea, and together they watched the moon rise. "Do you miss the old days?" she asked. "When we didn't think about all this?" Vincent smiled softly. "Sometimes. But back then, I thought ignorance was safety. Now I know better. It's not about fear, Claire. It's about choosing wisely." She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. In that quiet moment, Vincent felt a peace he hadn't felt in weeks. From then on, every time Vincent cut an avocado, he handled it with the same care he once reserved for fragile glass. If he couldn't finish it, he stored it properly, knowing its life was brief. He no longer fooled himself into thinking the pit or the fridge alone could protect it. Instead, he accepted that freshness was fleeting and that honoring it meant respecting its limits. The lesson carried beyond the avocado. Vincent found himself applying the same awareness to other parts of life. He realized that people, like food, could not be taken for granted. Friendships had to be nurtured before they spoiled. Moments had to be savored before they slipped away. Even his own body demanded the same care, listening, respecting, never assuming it could be pushed aside until tomorrow. In the end, Vincent understood that when fresh turns deadly overnight was not just about avocados. It was about the fragility of all things, the fine line between nourishment and harm, between safety and risk. And as he bit into a carefully preserved slice the next morning, its green still vibrant, he whispered to himself a quiet vow. No more careless trust, only mindful care from this day on. Vincent had never thought much about his heart until the doctor first put him on medication. It was years ago, after a routine checkup revealed that his blood wasn't flowing as smoothly as it should. The word clot had slipped into the conversation, and with it came prescriptions. Small tablets meant to keep his blood thin and his heart safe. At first, the pills were just another part of his morning, no more significant than brushing his teeth. But as the years went by, he began to understand that every tablet he swallowed carried a weight, a responsibility. Still, he never imagined his beloved avocado could interfere. When the doctor mentioned food interactions, Vincent assumed he meant the usual suspects: grapefruit, alcohol, too much salt. He nodded politely, confident that his simple meals posed no danger. After all, what risk could a piece of fruit hold? Yet, as his awareness deepened, he began to learn otherwise. One afternoon, as Vincent sat at the kitchen table with his notebook open, he found a passage in a health article that made him pause. It spoke of vitamin K, the nutrient that helps blood clot, and how foods rich in it could counteract blood thinners. He read the line again, slowly. Avocados contain vitamin K, and inconsistent intake can interfere with medication. His chest tightened. All at once, the flutters, the dizziness, the unease began to make sense. Could it really be that simple? Could his daily avocado toast have been tugging against the very medicine meant to protect him? Claire found him hunched over the page, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked. Vincent handed her the article, his voice low. "It's the avocado. It's fighting the pills." She frowned, scanning the words. "But they've always told us it's healthy." Vincent shook his head. "Healthy for some, maybe not for me." The realization cut deep. It wasn't betrayal this time, it was clarity. For years, he had been unknowingly setting up a quiet battle inside his body, medicine against food, each pulling in opposite directions. At his next appointment, Vincent brought it up with the doctor. He admitted, almost sheepishly, how much avocado he ate, how it had been his morning staple for years. The doctor nodded knowingly, not surprised at all. "You're not alone," he said gently. "Many patients don't realize the impact of vitamin K. The problem isn't eating avocado, it's changing the amount suddenly. Your body and your medication rely on consistency. If you eat it daily, we can adjust your dose. But if you eat it unpredictably, that's when the danger comes." Those words struck Vincent like a bell. Consistency. It was a principle he understood from life itself. He had built houses in his younger years, laying brick upon brick with steady hands. He knew that stability came not from occasional effort, but from careful, repeated work. And now he saw that his health was no different. The problem wasn't the avocado, it was his careless approach. One week he ate it every morning, the next week he skipped. He had treated it casually, not realizing that such small shifts could ripple so deeply inside him. Back home, Vincent spoke with Claire about what the doctor had said. Together they decided to make a plan. If he was to eat avocado, he would do it steadily, in measured portions. No more sudden binges of guacamole, no skipping weeks, and then starting again. Claire, ever practical, bought a small calendar for the fridge. Each time Vincent had avocado, he marked it with a green dot. It was simple, almost childish, but it gave him comfort. It turned his meals into a rhythm, something his body could count on. At first, the discipline felt strange. He missed the freedom of eating without thought, of letting habit guide him. But as the days passed, Vincent noticed something new. His chest no longer fluttered so often. The dizziness lessened. It was as if his body was finally exhaling after years of confusion. He realized then that the avocado wasn't his enemy. It was his teacher. It had forced him to listen more carefully, to live more deliberately. His daughter, hearing about his new system, teased him kindly. "Dad, you're turning food into homework." Vincent laughed, but he shook his head. "Not homework. It's care. It's what keeps me here with all of you." The grandchildren, curious as always, wanted to help. They loved putting stickers on the calendar, giggling as they chose the brightest green ones. What had begun as a health adjustment quietly became a family ritual, a reminder that even small acts of mindfulness could ripple outward into love. One evening, sitting on the porch with the notebook in his lap, Vincent wrote, "Food and medicine must walk hand in hand. If I respect both, they will respect me." He closed the book with a quiet sense of peace. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about partnership between him and his food, between him and his health, between him and the people who cared for him. In the end, Vincent understood the truth. The danger had never been the avocado itself, but the way he had handled it. By learning to be consistent, to treat his body with the same steadiness he once gave his work, he found balance again. And as he bit into his carefully measured slice of avocado toast the next morning, he felt no dread, no doubt, only the quiet reassurance that he was, at last, on the right path. Vincent had never thought of his kitchen as a dangerous place. To him, it was a room of comfort, the scent of fresh bread from Claire's oven, the clinking of coffee cups, the soft scrape of toast being buttered in the morning. It was where laughter echoed during family gatherings and where quiet conversations happened late at night. Yet now, with each new discovery about his beloved avocado, Vincent was beginning to see the kitchen differently. It wasn't just a place of nourishment, it could also be a place of hidden risk. One evening, as he sat at the table marking his avocado calendar with another green dot, he came across an article his daughter had printed out for him. Its title leapt off the page: "Everyday Foods That Can Spike Your Stroke Risk." He frowned, adjusting his glasses, and began to read. The words tightened his chest as he scanned through the paragraphs. Among the usual suspects, salty snacks, processed meats, there it was again: avocado. Not because it was inherently harmful, but because of how easily it could disrupt balance when combined with his medication. Vincent set the paper down, his hand trembling slightly. He thought of his father, who had suffered a stroke in his 70s. He could still remember the day, the ambulance lights flashing against the living room curtains, the fear that had wrapped around their family like a vice. His father had survived, but was never quite the same afterward. That memory had haunted Vincent for years, and now the possibility that his own habits might be pulling him toward the same fate filled him with dread. Claire found him staring off into the distance, the article crumpled slightly in his hand. "What is it, Vincent?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his voice heavy. "I don't want to end up like my father, Claire. I can't risk a stroke over something as small as breakfast." She sat beside him, her hand warm on his knee. "Then we'll be careful. We'll watch. We'll listen. You're not alone in this." Her words soothed him, but the fear lingered like a shadow. The next day, Vincent visited the doctor again, this time determined to ask the hard questions. He brought the article with him, his notes tucked neatly in the back pocket of his notebook. The doctor listened patiently as Vincent described his worries, then nodded. "You're right to be cautious," he said. "Avocados are nutritious, but when mixed with blood thinners, the risk isn't always obvious. It's not the fruit alone. It's how it interacts with your body, your medications, your history." Those words settled heavily on Vincent. He had always thought of food in isolation, good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. But now he understood that context mattered just as much as content. What might be healing for one person could be harmful for another. It wasn't just about avocados, it was about the entire web of choices that wove through his kitchen. On the way home, Vincent stopped by the market. He walked slowly through the aisles, his eyes lingering on the foods he had once picked up without hesitation. Bananas, leafy greens, even green tea, he now saw them through a new lens. Each one held potential, yes, but also responsibility. He felt a strange mixture of caution and empowerment, as if he had been handed the keys to a house he had lived in for years, but only now discovered had hidden rooms. That evening, as Claire prepared dinner, Vincent hovered nearby. He noticed things he hadn't before: the way she stored leftovers, the condiments she sprinkled without measuring, the quiet shortcuts that came with routine. "Do you ever think," he asked her gently, "that the kitchen can be just as risky as the medicine cabinet?" She paused, knife in hand, and looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe," she admitted, "but it can also be the place where we choose life, Vincent. It depends on how we use it." Her words stayed with him. The kitchen wasn't the enemy, it was the stage, and he, the one making choices, was the actor. The risk wasn't in the room itself, but in the habits he carried into it. That realization lifted something off his shoulders. It wasn't about living in fear of every bite. It was about learning the rhythms of his own body, respecting the delicate balance that kept him alive. The grandchildren came by that weekend, filling the house with their usual energy. As they raided the fruit bowl, Vincent found himself watching them with a new tenderness. He thought of how easily he had once eaten without thought, how blindly he had trusted. He wanted more for them, not fear, but awareness. So when his oldest granddaughter asked why he was cutting his avocado so carefully, he smiled and said, "Because every choice we make in the kitchen matters, even the small ones." She tilted her head, not fully understanding, but nodded as if she sensed the weight behind his words. That night, Vincent sat on the porch, the cool air brushing his face, and thought of the phrase that had haunted him: a stroke risk hiding in your kitchen. It no longer felt like a threat, but a reminder that danger and safety often lived side by side, and it was up to him to choose which one he invited in. He picked up his notebook and wrote, "The kitchen isn't just where meals are made, it's where futures are shaped." As he closed the book and looked out at the stars, Vincent felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He could not erase the risks entirely, but he could face them with care, with consistency, with love. And in that simple truth, he found not fear, but strength. The strength to greet another morning, another slice of avocado, another chance to live wisely. Vincent had always prided himself on not wasting food. If an avocado was still firm, he figured it could be eaten just the same. "The blender will take care of it," he used to say with a chuckle, tossing rock-hard pieces into his morning smoothie. He liked the efficiency of it. Nothing wasted, everything used. But after weeks of slowly uncovering the hidden risks behind his old habits, Vincent began to wonder if his impatience with unripe fruit had been costing him more than he realized. One morning, he pulled a firm avocado from the counter. It looked perfect from the outside, deep green, smooth skin, but when he pressed it, it barely gave. For years, he wouldn't have thought twice about slicing it open and throwing it into the blender with bananas and milk. But that day, he hesitated. The memory of his stomach cramps, the unexplained bloating that had plagued him last summer, came rushing back. Could those uncomfortable days have been tied to this simple choice? Claire noticed his hesitation. "What's wrong, Vincent? You've made that smoothie 1,000 times." He held the fruit in his hand, frowning. "I think I've been eating them too soon, before they're ready." She tilted her head. "You mean unripe?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, and maybe that's why I never felt right after." His voice carried both regret and relief, the relief of finally connecting dots that had long puzzled him. That afternoon, he spoke with his doctor again, bringing up his suspicion about unripe avocados. The doctor listened carefully, then explained in plain words. Unripe fruit can be harsh on the stomach. It carried compounds that mellowed only with ripening, and while not everyone reacted strongly, those with sensitive systems, like many seniors, could feel the effects sharply. Vincent felt a shiver down his spine. All those days of discomfort, the bloating he had brushed off, the cramps he had blamed on age, they might have been avoidable all along. He thought back to one particularly bad day last summer when his granddaughter's birthday party had been almost ruined for him. He had made his usual smoothie that morning with a firm avocado, determined not to waste it. By the time the party began, he was doubled over with stomach pain, trying to mask it with smiles for the children. He had blamed the heat, the rich food at the buffet, but now, in hindsight, he saw the truth more clearly. It wasn't the celebration, it was the mistake he had carried into his glass that morning. Determined not to repeat the error, Vincent began teaching himself patience. Instead of slicing too soon, he learned to test the fruit properly, pressing gently, waiting for the soft give that signaled ripeness. At first, the waiting frustrated him. He had always been a man of action, used to fixing things the moment they appeared broken. But ripening could not be rushed. It demanded time, quiet, trust. And in that slowness, Vincent found an unexpected lesson. Claire laughed when she saw him carefully pressing each avocado in the store, shaking his head at the hard ones. "You've turned into a fruit whisperer," she teased. He grinned, embarrassed but proud. Better that than another stomach ache. Over time, he even began to enjoy the anticipation, the small satisfaction of checking each day until the avocado was ready. When at last he sliced it open and found the flesh soft and creamy, he felt not only relief but accomplishment, as if he had honored the fruit by letting it come into its own time. One evening, he explained it to his daughter, who had stopped by for dinner. "It's not just about the fruit," he told her. "It's about learning patience, about realizing that some things can't be forced. They have their own rhythm, and we're healthier when we respect it." She listened quietly, nodding, perhaps realizing her father was speaking not only about avocados, but about life itself. The grandchildren, of course, saw it differently. To them, it was a game. They loved helping Grandpa test the avocados, pressing gently and declaring which ones were ready and which ones needed more time. Their laughter filled the kitchen, turning what had once been a careless habit into a shared ritual of care and learning. Vincent realized that even his mistakes, once painful, could become opportunities to teach the next generation. As days passed, his stomach settled. The bloating eased, the cramps disappeared. He noticed how much lighter he felt, how meals no longer left him uneasy. It was such a simple change, waiting a few more days, learning to say, "Not yet," but the impact was profound. He realized that age hadn't been the culprit after all. It had been impatience, the small choices he had overlooked. One night, writing in his notebook, Vincent reflected, "An unripe avocado taught me patience. It taught me that my body, like the fruit, has its own timing. Rushing it only brings pain." He closed the notebook with a sense of gratitude. Mistakes, he realized, were not curses. They were invitations, quiet nudges to slow down, to pay attention, to change. And so, as Vincent stood in his kitchen the next morning, slicing into a perfectly ripe avocado, he felt more than just satisfaction. He felt trust. Trust in the process, trust in his body, trust that by listening closely, he could keep himself safe. The dangers of unripe avocados were no longer hidden threats in his kitchen. They were lessons he had faced, understood, and transformed into wisdom. Vincent had never heard the word microbiome until a young dietitian at his doctor's office mentioned it. She had explained it simply, how the gut was like a garden, full of tiny living things that kept the body in balance. "Feed the garden well," she said, "and it will protect you." Vincent had nodded politely, not thinking much of it at the time, but now, after weeks of noticing how his body reacted to avocados, especially when they were firm and unripe, the word echoed in his mind. Could it be that what he had thought was a harmless choice had been quietly disturbing the garden inside him? He remembered too clearly the months when his digestion had been unpredictable. Bloating that made him loosen his belt after even small meals, sudden cramps that twisted his insides, days when his energy sagged and he blamed it on age. He had shrugged it off as just getting older. Yet in hindsight, he realized the pattern often followed his smoothies, those quick blends where he tossed in whatever was on hand, even hard avocados that weren't yet ready. He had been so determined not to waste, so proud of his efficiency, that he hadn't noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table with Claire, he voiced the thought aloud. Maybe it wasn't age after all. Maybe it was the fruit. Claire looked at him, concern softening her face. "You mean the stomach pains?" He nodded. "Yes, and more than that. I think it was hurting my insides in ways I couldn't see." She reached for his hand. "Then it's good you're paying attention now." Her words gave him comfort, but they also stirred a quiet grief. How much of his discomfort had been avoidable if only he had listened sooner? The next week, Vincent decided to experiment. Instead of using unripe avocados, he waited patiently for them to soften. He ate them in small portions, ripe and creamy, and watched how his body responded. To his surprise, the bloating eased. His stomach felt calmer, his energy steadier. It was as though a storm had passed and left clear skies behind. Each meal became not just food, but feedback, a conversation between his choices and his body. And for the first time in a long while, he felt he was finally listening. But the lesson went deeper than digestion. Vincent began to think about the invisible world inside him, the microbiome, that delicate garden the dietitian had spoken of. He imagined it now as a patch of soil he had ignored, throwing in stones and weeds without realizing the damage. Every hard avocado, every careless choice had been like trampling the ground. Yet now, with patience and care, he could nurture it again. The thought gave him hope. It meant it wasn't too late to heal. Claire noticed the difference in him. "You're lighter these days," she remarked one morning as they walked together in the park. Vincent smiled. "Because my stomach isn't fighting me anymore." She squeezed his arm, proud of him, but Vincent knew it wasn't just about the fruit, it was about respect. Respect for his body, respect for the unseen systems that worked tirelessly within him, asking only for balance in return. His daughter, ever curious, asked him during Sunday dinner why he was so particular about ripeness now. Vincent explained, not with scientific terms, but with simple words. "My stomach is like a garden. When I rushed the fruit, I threw it off balance. Now I wait, and it thanks me." She laughed softly, but there was admiration in her eyes. "Leave it to Dad to turn a piece of fruit into a life lesson," she teased. Yet she listened closely, perhaps realizing there was wisdom in his simplicity. The grandchildren, of course, took it literally. They began calling his stomach Grandpa's garden, giggling whenever he tested an avocado. but their laughter only deepened his joy. He realized that what had once been a painful mistake had become a teaching moment, not just for himself, but for the family who looked up to him. His journey was no longer private. It was a story being shared, woven into the fabric of those he loved. One evening, Vincent sat on the porch with his notebook, reflecting. He wrote slowly, carefully. "I thought the pain was age. I thought the discomfort was normal, but it was my body asking me to listen. My gut is wiser than I gave it credit for." He paused, staring at the words, then added, "A garden only thrives when tended. So does a man." Closing the book, he felt a peace settle over him. He had spent years dismissing his symptoms, but now, at last, he was honoring them. The truth about the microbiome was simple yet profound. It needed care, patience, and consistency. And Vincent, with all his years, had finally learned that lesson from something as ordinary as an avocado. Each time he ate it now, ripe and ready, he did so with gratitude, not just for the food itself, but for the way it had taught him to respect the hidden life within him. In the end, Vincent's battle with avocado gut was not just about avoiding discomfort. It was about awakening to the delicate balance of his body, about realizing that even small, invisible choices could shape his health in powerful ways. As he savored a perfectly ripe slice one quiet morning, he whispered a prayer of thanks for the lesson, for the healing, for the reminder that even at 72, life was still teaching him how to listen. Vincent had always thought of allergies as something other people struggled with. Pollen in spring, cats that made friends sneeze, peanuts that kept his granddaughter's school nut-free. But latex? That was something he had never once considered. To him, latex was just a material. Gloves at the hospital, rubber bands in the junk drawer, balloons at a birthday party. Harmless, forgettable, a background detail of daily life. Yet as he soon learned, even these ordinary things could hide a secret trigger that tied directly to the fruit he thought was his ally. It began with a conversation at the clinic. Vincent had gone in for his routine check, carrying his notebook as usual. The nurse, a cheerful young woman with quick hands, snapped on a pair of latex gloves before taking his blood pressure. Vincent noticed a faint itch rise on his wrist where the cuff pressed against his skin. It was nothing dramatic, just a small irritation, but enough for him to rub the spot afterward. He dismissed it at first. Perhaps his skin was dry, or maybe the cuff had been too tight. But the nurse glanced at him and said casually, "Ever have a reaction to latex?" The question startled him. "Latex?" he repeated. "No, I don't think so." She nodded, unconcerned, but her words planted a seed in his mind. Later, he mentioned it to the doctor, who explained gently, "Some people develop sensitivities over time, and here's something most don't realize. Foods like avocado can cross-react with latex allergies. It's called latex fruit syndrome." Vincent blinked, confused. "You mean eating avocado can feel like touching latex?" The doctor nodded. "For some, yes. The proteins are similar, and the body reacts as if they're the same." The thought unsettled Vincent deeply. All at once, moments from the past began to resurface. Times when he had eaten avocado and felt his lips tingle. Times when his throat felt scratchy, though he brushed it off as coincidence. Could it have been more than coincidence all along? That night at the dinner table, Vincent shared what he had learned. Claire frowned, setting down her fork. "But you've been eating avocados for years." Vincent nodded slowly. "Maybe my body's only now showing it, or maybe I ignored the signs before." The memory of his trembling hand at the cafe, the shortness of breath that had haunted him, now seemed to connect in ways he hadn't wanted to admit. Claire reached for his hand across the table. "Then we need to be careful. We can't let a fruit turn into something dangerous." His daughter's reaction was sharper. When he told her the next day, she gasped. "Dad, this is serious. People go to the ER over this kind of thing." Vincent saw the fear in her eyes and felt the weight of it. It wasn't just his health at stake. It was the worry he placed on those who loved him. He promised her he would pay closer attention, would avoid avocados if his body showed any sign of reaction. Yet the thought pained him. The fruit had been his comfort for so long. Now it felt like a friend who might betray him at any moment. A week later, the test came. At a family gathering, Vincent's granddaughter made guacamole. She begged him to try some, proud of her new recipe. He hesitated, then took a small bite, not wanting to disappoint her. Within minutes, he felt it, an itch around his mouth, a faint tightening in his throat. Panic flickered through him, though he kept his face calm for the children. He excused himself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his skin, whispering prayers under his breath. The reaction faded, mild but unmistakable. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, shaken. The doctor had been right. Back home that night, Vincent sat in silence, the weight of the experience pressing heavily on his chest. Claire sat beside him, worry etched in her features. "No more testing, Vincent," she said firmly. "Your body's spoken. We have to listen." He nodded slowly, realizing the truth in her words. The risk was real, and denial could no longer protect him. What once had been a symbol of health was now a reminder of fragility. Yet as the days passed, Vincent began to see it differently. It wasn't just about loss, it was about awareness. For years, he had ignored the subtle cues his body had given him. Now, finally, he was learning to respect them. He began reading more, discovering that bananas, kiwis, even chestnuts could trigger similar reactions in those with latex sensitivity. Instead of feeling cursed, he felt strangely empowered. Knowledge gave him choices, and choices gave him control. His grandchildren, ever curious, asked why he no longer ate guacamole. He knelt down and explained in simple words, "Grandpa's body doesn't like it anymore. It makes me itchy." They nodded solemnly, then hugged him as if to say it was all right. Their acceptance softened the loss. He realized then that food was only one part of life. What mattered more was being present, being well enough to sit with them, to share stories, to watch them grow. One evening, as Vincent sat with his notebook, he wrote, "Avocado was my friend until it wasn't. But maybe it's still a teacher. It taught me to listen, to notice, to stop pretending my body doesn't speak." He closed the book and smiled faintly. Though the journey had been painful, it had also been clarifying. He no longer saw his sensitivity as betrayal. He saw it as guidance, as his body's way of keeping him safe. In the end, Vincent learned that even the most beloved foods could turn into hidden triggers, especially as the body changed with age. But he also learned that listening, truly listening, could turn fear into wisdom. And as he sat at the table the next morning with a plate of eggs instead of avocado toast, he didn't feel deprived. He felt alive, grateful for the chance to keep learning, to keep adjusting, to keep honoring the life still unfolding before him. Vincent had always loved guacamole. There was something about the way it brought people together. The bowl in the center of the table, tortilla chips circling it like wagons, hands dipping in and out, laughter rising over the crunch. For him, guacamole was less about the avocado itself and more about the memory of gatherings, summer barbecues, birthday parties, evenings when his daughter and grandchildren visited. But now, after everything he had learned, that once innocent dip carried with it a shadow of danger. It was his granddaughter's birthday when the truth hit hardest. She had insisted on making guacamole herself, proud of her new cooking skills. Vincent watched her mash the fruit with determination, adding lime, onion, and a pinch of salt, just as Claire had taught her. She looked up at him with bright eyes. "Try it, Grandpa. I made it just for you." He hesitated, his heart tightening. He didn't want to disappoint her, didn't want to be the grandfather who refused a child's gift. So, with a smile that hid his fear, he took a small bite. At first, it was just flavor, the tang of lime, the creaminess of avocado, the familiar comfort of something he had loved for decades. But then within minutes, he felt it, the faint itch around his lips, the dryness in his throat, the hint of something swelling inside. He excused himself calmly, slipping into the bathroom where he gripped the sink and breathed slowly, waiting for the sensation to fade. It passed, thank God, but it left him shaken. For the first time, he realized how easily a joyful moment could have turned into a crisis. When he returned to the table, Claire's eyes met his, wide with concern. She knew, she had always known. "Vincent," she whispered later, "no more, not even a taste." He nodded, the weight of her words pressing against the memory of his granddaughter's smile. It wasn't just about avoiding discomfort anymore. It was about avoiding danger, about protecting himself, and sparing his family the fear of an emergency they never expected. Over the following weeks, Vincent began to see guacamole differently. What once was a treat became a symbol of risk, a reminder that danger often hides in the familiar. He thought of the restaurants where he had casually ordered it, the parties where he had eaten it without thought. How many times had he been lucky? How many times had he dismissed the scratch in his throat or the faint nausea as nothing more than indigestion? He shuddered to think of the close calls he had ignored, His daughter, worried after hearing about the birthday incident, begged him to carry an epinephrine injector just in case. "Dad, even if it's rare, it only takes once," she said, her voice trembling. Vincent resisted at first, pride pushing back against the idea of carrying something that marked him as fragile. But later, as he sat with Claire in the quiet of their living room, he admitted the truth. "Maybe it's time, not because I'm weak, but because I want to stay strong for all of you." Claire's eyes softened and she reached for his hand. "That's the bravest thing you can do." From then on, Vincent avoided guacamole, no matter how tempting. At gatherings, when the bowl appeared, he politely declined, focusing instead on conversation, on the faces around him. The grandchildren noticed at first, puzzled by his refusal, but he explained gently, "Grandpa's body doesn't like it anymore. It makes me sick." They accepted it with the resilience only children have, moving on quickly to other delights. Vincent realized then that the loss wasn't as heavy as he had feared. He didn't need the dip to feel included. What mattered was being present, being well enough to laugh and share in the moment. Still, the memory of that day haunted him. The itch in his throat, the tightening in his chest. It had been mild, yes, but it was a warning, a glimpse of what could have been far worse. And that thought reshaped the way he approached not only food, but life itself. He realized that danger often came disguised as comfort, that the things we love most could sometimes hold the sharpest edges. It wasn't about living in fear, but about living with awareness. One evening, sitting on the porch with his notebook, Vincent wrote, "Guacamole taught me that love and danger can sit in the same bowl. It's not the fruit's fault. It's my body's way of saying no. And I must listen, even when it hurts." He closed the book, feeling the truth settle deep in his bones. For years, he had trusted blindly. Now, at 72, he was learning the courage of saying no, of walking away, of choosing life over habit. Claire, ever watchful, reminded him often, "You've given up nothing important, Vincent. You've gained peace." And she was right. The guacamole bowl might be gone from his plate, but his life remained full, of family, of love, of mornings where he woke with strength instead of fear. He realized that sometimes survival wasn't about holding on, but about letting go. And so, whenever he saw guacamole now, Vincent no longer felt longing, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had learned before it was too late. Gratitude that he had listened to his body. Gratitude that he was still here to watch his granddaughter grow. The dip that once symbolized joy now symbolized something deeper. The wisdom of restraint, the power of choice, the quiet victory of respecting his limits. In the end, Vincent knew the truth. His next guacamole really could have been fatal, but because he chose to listen, to change, to accept, he had turned danger into safety, fear into wisdom, loss into life, and that, he thought with a soft smile, was worth far more than any bowl of dip. Vincent had always been skeptical of fads. Over the years, he had seen them come and go, grapefruit diets, miracle teas, powders that promised eternal youth. He chuckled at them from a distance, confident that he was too wise to fall for such things. Yet even he wasn't immune to curiosity. One day, scrolling through his granddaughter's tablet, he saw a video of a smiling influencer grinding avocado seeds into a fine powder. "The real superfood is hiding inside the pit," the woman declared. Vincent shook his head at first, but something about her confidence unsettled him. Could it be true that all this time he had been throwing away the most powerful part of the fruit? The thought lingered, gnawing at him. A week later, he decided to try it for himself. He had no industrial grinder, only his old kitchen blender. The machine groaned as he forced the hard pit inside, breaking it into sharp fragments. The sound was awful, like stones rattling inside a tin can. He added the pieces to his smoothie, blending until the drink looked vaguely normal, then swallowed it down. At first, nothing happened. He almost laughed at himself for worrying. But later that day, he felt an odd heaviness in his stomach, a sharp discomfort that refused to ease. By evening, the cramps had grown so strong that he lay curled on the couch, sweat on his brow, whispering to Claire, "I shouldn't have done that." Claire, frightened, begged him to go to the hospital. Stubborn as always, Vincent refused. By morning, the pain had dulled, but the experience haunted him. He had always trusted his instincts, yet this time he had ignored them, swayed by a stranger's promise on a glowing screen. For days afterward, he felt unsettled, ashamed. He confided in his doctor, who shook his head gravely. Seeds are not meant to be eaten, Vincent. They're too hard, too toxic. Your body can't process them. You could have done real harm. The doctor's words cut deep. Vincent realized how close he had come to trading health for hype. It wasn't just the pain that troubled him, it was the thought of what might have happened if the fragments had torn his insides, if he had ended up in surgery, or worse. He thought of his father's stroke, his mother's warnings, the grandchildren who still needed him. All for what? A trend? A promise of hidden antioxidants? Vincent shook his head in disbelief. He had nearly risked everything for nothing. At dinner that week, he admitted his mistake to the family. His daughter's face paled as he described the cramps, the way his body had fought back. "Dad, why would you even try that?" she asked, half angry, half afraid. Vincent sighed, shame in his voice. "Because I wanted to believe there was more, that maybe I'd been wasting something valuable all these years." His granddaughter, sitting wide-eyed, whispered, "But Grandpa, you always tell us not to believe everything on the internet." Her words pierced him. He realized then that his actions hadn't only endangered himself, they had contradicted the very lessons he wanted to pass on. From that moment, Vincent vowed to be more careful. He returned to his old rhythm of composting the pits, watching them break down into soil for the roses and tomatoes he tended in the backyard. He found peace in that cycle, waste becoming nourishment for new life. "This is where the pit belongs," he told Claire one morning, scattering the compost with his hands. "Not in my stomach, but in the earth," she smiled, relieved to see his wisdom return. Yet the lesson stayed with him. He realized how easily even the wise could be swayed by promises of hidden cures. Age didn't shield him from temptation. If anything, it made him more vulnerable, longing for something that might restore strength, energy, youth. The seed trend had been dangerous, yes, but it had also been revealing. It showed him how fragile the line between curiosity and recklessness could be. One quiet evening, Vincent opened his notebook and wrote, "The seed looked harmless, but it carried knives inside. I should have trusted my body, not the noise of the crowd." True health isn't in shortcuts, it's in patience, balance, respect. He closed the notebook, breathing deeply, as if releasing the last remnants of shame. Mistakes, he reminded himself, were only fatal if left unacknowledged. If faced honestly, they could become teachers. The deadly seed trend had frightened him, but it had also awakened him to a greater truth. Not every part of what we eat is meant for us. Sometimes respecting limits is the most powerful choice. And as Vincent stood in his garden, watching his compost feed the flowers, he realized he hadn't wasted the seed at all. He had simply returned it to where it belonged, giving life instead of risking his own. Vincent had never been fond of hospitals. To him, they were places filled with cold light, hurried footsteps, and the scent of antiseptic that clung to the air. He only went when absolutely necessary, and even then, he kept his visits short. But after his frightening experiment with the avocado seed, the thought of the emergency room haunted him. He had escaped with nothing more than pain and fear, but others might not be so lucky. And the more he read, the more stories he uncovered. People rushed to the ER after making the same mistake he had made. One evening, while flipping through the local paper, Vincent came across an article that made him pause. It told the story of a young woman who had followed the superfood advice of grinding avocado pits. Within weeks, she developed severe abdominal pain, and scans revealed tiny tears in her intestines caused by the sharp fragments. She required emergency surgery. Vincent sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in his hands, feeling as though he were looking at a mirror of what could have been his fate. When Claire saw his face, pale and troubled, she asked softly, "What is it now, Vincent?" He handed her the article, his voice low. "I could have been her. I was one step away." Claire read silently, her lips pressed tight. Then she reached for his hand. "But you weren't, and now you know better." Still, the thought unsettled him. For the first time, he felt the hospital's doors opening in his imagination, pulling him into a place where his mistake might have ended differently. At his next checkup, Vincent asked his doctor about the cases he had read. The doctor nodded gravely. "Yes, we've seen it. People come in with stomach blockages, with pain that won't stop. Some need surgery, others are poisoned by compounds in the seeds. It's more common than you'd think." Vincent swallowed hard, a cold chill running down his back. To imagine himself on a stretcher, wheeled under those harsh lights, filled him with both shame and fear. The doctor leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "Vincent, you have to remember, just because something is natural doesn't mean it's safe. Hospitals are full of people who forgot that truth." The words struck him deeply. He had always trusted the earth's gifts, believing nature knew best. But now he understood that wisdom wasn't in blind faith, but in discernment. The earth offered both food and poison. It was up to him to tell the difference. Back home, Vincent couldn't shake the image of ER doctors working under pressure, rushing to save people from mistakes that could have been avoided. He pictured himself among them, his body fragile on a hospital bed, Claire waiting in the corridor with worry etched into her face. The vision brought him to tears one evening as he sat alone in the living room. When Claire found him, she knelt beside his chair and whispered, "You're still here. That's what matters." He nodded, grateful for her steadiness, but determined never to let his carelessness put her through that fear again. The grandchildren noticed changes in him too. At family meals, he would gently warn them about internet health hacks, reminding them to be cautious. His eldest grandson, curious, asked, "Grandpa, why are you so serious about this stuff?" Vincent looked at him with tender eyes. "Because I learned the hard way that not everything that looks healthy is safe, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes." The boy nodded, absorbing the weight in his grandfather's words. Vincent realized then that his story could serve as more than a warning. It could be a shield for those he loved. One Sunday afternoon, his daughter invited him to speak to her book club, a group of middle-aged women who often shared recipes and wellness tips. Nervous but willing, Vincent told them his story, how he had nearly harmed himself chasing a trend, how the ER was full of people who had made similar mistakes. He spoke simply, humbly, not as an expert, but as a man who had learned through pain. To his surprise, they listened intently, nodding, their eyes filled with the same mixture of fear and gratitude he had once felt. By the end, several thanked him for sharing, promising they would never try grinding avocado seeds themselves. Vincent left that gathering with a strange sense of purpose. His mistake had found meaning. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "I could have been another ER story, but instead I became a voice. If sharing my scars can keep others safe, then maybe they were not in vain." He closed the book with a quiet smile. For the first time since his ordeal, he felt peace. The hidden dangers were still there, yes, but now he knew how to face them, with caution, with wisdom, with the courage to speak openly about what he had learned. In the end, Vincent realized that the hospital didn't need to be a place of fear. It could also be a reminder that life was fragile, that choices mattered, and that mistakes could be turned into lessons. And as he sat with Claire on the porch that evening, the sun setting in soft gold, he whispered, "I'm grateful I didn't end up there, but I'm even more grateful for what it taught me." For most of his life, Vincent had thought of cooking as a way to make food better. Heat, in his mind, brought out flavors, softened textures, and turned raw ingredients into comfort. He had grilled meat on summer evenings, roasted vegetables in the oven, fried eggs on quiet mornings. So when he first saw chefs on television grilling avocado halves, he thought it seemed natural, creative, even elegant. He remembered trying it once at a barbecue years ago, placing the green fruit on the grill beside the corn and sausages. At the time, he thought little of it. But now, after everything he had learned, those memories carried a different weight. The first time Vincent truly questioned cooked avocado was when his neighbor, Tom, brought some over for a potluck. Tom had charred them lightly on his grill, filling the air with a smoky scent. Everyone praised the dish, but Vincent, mindful of his health journey, hesitated. He tasted a small bite and found the texture odd, stringy, bitter, nothing like the creamy richness he loved. That night, his stomach twisted uncomfortably and his sleep was restless. At the time, he dismissed it as coincidence, but later he wondered if there had been more to it. One afternoon, sitting at his kitchen table, Vincent read an article that confirmed his suspicions. It explained how the healthy fats in avocado, so delicate and beneficial when eaten raw, could break down under high heat, creating harmful compounds. He stared at the words, a chill running through him. The fruit he thought he was elevating through cooking was being stripped of its goodness, even turned into something dangerous. He felt betrayed, but more than that, he felt foolish. How many times had he followed trends without asking questions? How many times had he traded health for appearances, chasing flavor without realizing the cost? When he shared the article with Claire, she frowned. "So, all those cooking shows, what they showed wasn't safe?" Vincent shook his head. "Not for me, maybe not for anyone." He explained how heat destroyed the vitamins, how it warped the very oils that were supposed to protect his heart. Claire reached for his hand. "Then we'll keep it raw. We've always liked it best that way anyway." Her words gave him comfort, but the unease lingered. He had to wonder how many others were still out there, grilling, frying, believing they were doing something healthy, when in truth they were walking into harm. The next Sunday, at a family gathering, Vincent told his story. His daughter listened closely, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Dad, I've roasted avocado slices before, for salads, you know." He nodded gravely. "I did too once. Never again." The grandchildren wrinkled their noses at the thought of warm avocado, declaring it gross, and Vincent laughed, relieved. "Then maybe you'll be spared," he told them. Yet beneath the laughter was a serious lesson he wanted them to hear, that even good food had its limits, and respect meant knowing when to stop. Over the following weeks, Vincent experimented with alternatives. Instead of heating avocado, he added it fresh to cooled pasta dishes, stirring it gently to preserve its creamy texture. He made sauces separately, drizzling them over roasted vegetables after they left the oven. He even learned a trick from a chef's magazine, using a smoking gun to give avocado a grilled flavor without heat. Each new method felt like a small victory, proof that he didn't need to sacrifice taste for safety. Claire teased him for becoming inventive at his age, but she supported him fully. "You're finding your way," she said one evening, watching him prepare dinner with uncharacteristic care. Vincent smiled. "I suppose I am. Better late than never." And as he tasted the cool avocado paired with smoky roasted peppers, he felt not deprived, but liberated. He realized that health wasn't about denial. It was about creativity, about finding new paths where old ones had failed. Still, the memory of cooked avocado lingered as a warning. Vincent often thought back to that barbecue years ago, remembering how proudly he had served the grilled halves, how everyone had smiled without knowing what was hidden inside. He shuddered at the thought of how ignorance had blinded him. "We didn't know better," he told Claire one night, "but now we do, and that makes all the difference." In his notebook, he wrote, "Cooking taught me discipline, but avocado taught me humility. Not everything improves with fire. Some things are strongest in their natural form." The words felt heavy and true, like stones he had carried for years finally set down. He realized that his journey wasn't just about food, it was about learning when to let things be as they are, about trusting simplicity instead of complicating it with needless effort. In the end, Vincent understood that cooking avocados the wrong way wasn't just a culinary mistake, it was a metaphor. It reminded him that life itself couldn't always be forced, reshaped, or rushed. Sometimes the best thing we can do is leave things whole, natural, untouched. And as he sat with Claire at the table, savoring a simple salad topped with raw avocado, he whispered, "This is enough. More than enough." Vincent had always thought of toxins as something distant. Chemicals in factories, smoke in the air, pesticides on crops he didn't grow. They belonged to headlines, not to the quiet rhythm of his own kitchen. But after learning how heat could twist avocado's oils into something harmful, he began to see the word differently. Toxins weren't just outside in the world, they could be born right there on his plate, created by the choices of his own hand. One evening, curious and cautious, Vincent dug through the stack of health articles his daughter had printed for him. One line caught his eye and held it tight. When delicate oils break down under high heat, they release compounds that can damage DNA. He read it again, slower this time, the words sinking into him like cold water. Damage DNA. That wasn't just stomach upset or a fluttering heart, that was the very blueprint of life itself being touched, altered, weakened. He set the paper down, his chest tightening. Images filled his mind. His father weakened after a stroke, his uncle who had lost a battle with cancer, his neighbor Tom coughing through chemo. For years, Vincent had believed his simple diet would shield him, that the avocado toast in the morning was a kind of armor. But now he saw that even that armor had cracks. The fruit he trusted could turn if handled wrongly, creating poisons not seen, not tasted, but felt in the deepest parts of his body. That night at dinner, Vincent shared what he had read with Claire. She listened quietly, her fork resting untouched on her plate. "DNA," she whispered at last. That's not small." Vincent nodded, his face etched with worry. "No, it means the damage doesn't just vanish. It can shape what comes after." Claire reached across the table, her hand steady on his. "Then we don't cook it. Ever. We keep it safe, natural. We've already learned enough to know better." Her reassurance calmed him, but the thought lingered. Later that night, he stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the green fruit resting in the bowl. He he felt both awe and caution. Something so ordinary, sitting quietly on his counter, carried the power to heal or harm depending on how he treated it. That realization humbled him. It wasn't about fearing the avocado, it was about respecting its limits. Over the next days, Vincent grew more mindful not just of avocados, but of everything that touched heat in his kitchen. He lowered the flame when frying, avoided burning toast, watched for the faint smoke that signaled oils breaking down. Claire teased him for being fussy, but he smiled and shook his head. "Not fussy," he said. "Careful. I'd rather protect what's inside me than rush what's on the plate." At a family gathering, his daughter noticed his habits. "Dad, you're different these days," she remarked, "more cautious." Vincent looked at her with gentle eyes. "Because I've learned how fragile we are. One careless choice can reach deeper than we think." His words silenced the table for a moment, the weight of them sinking into everyone's thoughts. The grandchildren, of course, didn't understand DNA, but Vincent found a way to explain. He knelt down and said, "Imagine your body is like a library filled with books that tell your story. If a fire burns even one page, the story changes. Cooking certain things the wrong way can start those fires inside us. That's why we must be gentle." The children nodded, wide-eyed, as if he had told them a secret of the universe. And in a way, he had. That night, Vincent wrote in his notebook, "I once thought harm was only what I could feel. Pain, sickness, weakness. But now I see harm can be silent, hidden, striking at the very code of who we are. That truth frightens me, but it also teaches me to choose wisely." Closing the notebook, he felt a strange mixture of fear and strength. Fear because the risks were real. Strength because knowledge gave him the power to avoid them. As weeks passed, Vincent no longer longed for grilled avocado or trendy recipes he saw on cooking shows. Instead, he took comfort in the simplicity of raw slices, in the soft greens spread on toast, in the cool cubes tossed into a salad. He realized that sometimes the safest path was also the simplest, and he felt no loss, only gratitude that he had learned the truth before it was too late. In the end, Vincent came to understand that toxins weren't only found in polluted rivers or factory smoke. They could appear quietly in the food on his plate, born of heat, of haste, of carelessness. But just as quietly, they could be avoided by patience, by respect, by the courage to change. And as he shared an avocado with Claire one quiet morning, both of them smiling at the ordinary joy of breakfast, Vincent whispered, "It's not the fruit that's dangerous, it's forgetting to honor it." By the time Vincent reached his 73rd birthday, avocados no longer felt like a casual snack. They had become a mirror, reflecting back his mistakes, his lessons, his growth. He no longer looked at the green fruit with blind trust, nor with fear. Instead, he looked with respect. Respect for what it offered, respect for what it demanded, respect for the balance it reminded him to keep. On the morning of his birthday, Claire surprised him with a simple breakfast. A slice of whole grain toast topped with perfectly ripe avocado, sprinkled with lemon juice and a pinch of sea salt. Nothing fancy, nothing showy, just the fruit as it was meant to be enjoyed. Vincent smiled as he lifted the fork, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the food, but for the journey that had brought him here, one cautious, thoughtful step at a time. As he ate, memories flooded him, the pit he once left in overnight, believing it would keep the fruit fresh. The smoothies he had blended with rock-hard avocados, not realizing the pain they caused. The guacamole that left his throat itching, the seeds he had foolishly tried to grind, the grilled halves he once thought were clever. Each mistake felt like a chapter now, a chapter that had shaped the man he had become. They were scars, yes, but also milestones, proof that learning never stopped, even in one's 70s. Later that day, his daughter and grandchildren arrived with laughter and balloons. They brought a cake, but also a small gift, a set of glass containers designed specifically for storing avocado halves. "To keep Grandpa safe," his granddaughter announced proudly. Vincent laughed, touched by their thoughtfulness. He realized then that his journey had not been his alone. Every choice he made had rippled outward, into Claire's worry, his daughter's vigilance, his grandchildren's curiosity. The lessons he had learned were now part of their lives too. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Vincent sat on the porch with Claire, a cup of tea warming his hands. He spoke softly, as if confessing a truth to the wind. "It wasn't the avocado's fault, it was mine. For trusting too much, for not paying attention, for thinking age made me wise enough to skip listening. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "But you did listen, Vincent, eventually, and that's what matters. You're still here." He nodded, his eyes misting. Still here and still learning. He thought of the doctor's words, the articles he had read, the warnings he had once ignored. He thought of the emergency room stories that could have been his but weren't. He thought of the fragile balance between harm and healing, a balance that rested in something as simple as how he stored, sliced, or served a piece of fruit. And in that reflection, he found peace. From then on, Vincent approached avocados with a quiet ritual. He tested them gently for ripeness, waited patiently until they yielded just enough. He stored the leftovers with care, brushing the surface with lemon, wrapping them tightly before placing them in the fridge. He ate them raw, never rushed, savoring their creamy texture as if it were a gift. To the outside world, these small habits might have seemed trivial, but to Vincent, they were sacred, acts of gratitude, reminders of how far he had come. The grandchildren, always eager to help, joined in his ritual. They loved pressing the fruit to test readiness, loved wrapping the halves with care, loved hearing Grandpa explain why patience mattered. To them, it was a game. To Vincent, it was legacy. He was not just protecting himself, he was passing down a way of seeing food, not as a blind promise of health, but as a living lesson in respect. One night, Vincent opened his notebook for the last time in the series of avocado entries. He wrote, "The right way is the patient way, the careful way, the grateful way. Avocado has taught me that health isn't in the fruit alone, but in the choices we weave around it. And those choices are mine to make." He closed the book, feeling lighter, as if a long journey had finally brought him home. As weeks turned into months, Vincent no longer spoke of his mistakes with shame. He spoke of them with pride, as one speaks of battles survived. When friends asked why he was so careful with avocados, he smiled and said, "Because they taught me to listen, and listening saved me." His words carried the weight of truth, a truth others could hear and make their own. In the end, Vincent discovered that enjoying avocados safely was not about rules or fear. It was about awareness, patience, and respect. It was about choosing the right bite at the right time, about treating food as a partner rather than a promise. And as he sat with Claire one quiet morning, sharing a simple meal, he realized that the fruit had given him more than health. It had given him wisdom, the kind that lingers long after the plate is empty. Vincent's story reminds us how even the smallest choices can carry the greatest weight. What began as a simple morning ritual, an avocado on toast, became the start of an unexpected journey. He thought he was nourishing himself, only to discover that hidden mistakes were quietly stealing his peace. From leaving the pit in overnight to blending unripe fruit, from ignoring the warning signs of allergic reactions to cooking away the very goodness he trusted, each moment was a turning point, a lesson written not in books but in his own body. Through fear, doubt, and even shame, Vincent chose not to give up. He chose to listen. He learned that health was not about fear or restriction, but about respect. Respect for his body, respect for the hidden truths inside the foods he ate, and respect for the balance that life demands of all of us. Along the way, he discovered that wisdom doesn't always come from knowing. It often comes from unlearning, from daring to question what we've always believed. And so Vincent grew. He transformed from a man who trusted blindly into a man who lived deliberately, from someone who thought age meant only decline, into someone who proved that growth never stops. His kitchen became a place not of risk, but of care, and his story a reminder that it is never too late to change course. If you take anything from Vincent's journey, let it be this: your body is always speaking. Every flutter, every ache, every moment of doubt is a call to pay attention. Don't ignore it. Don't brush it aside. Choose awareness, choose patience, choose respect. Because in those choices lies the power not only to protect your health, but to reclaim your life, one mindful bite at a time.